Adding life to a Minecraft build is an interesting concept. How I see it is like the little finishing touches to a build that turns it from a static structure to a living, breathing build. I think you'll understand what I mean a little bit better after I go through the builds in this video. But adding life is a very important part of Minecraft building and something that I've learned to do recently to elevate my Minecraft builds a little bit more. So first up here I have an interesting little redstone contraption. This is meant to emulate like a fountain or something, or some kind of water feature. It's spewing out water and you can see the particles in the air there. It's meant to look like water shooting out. And this is simply accomplished by using a little redstone circuit like this that pushes a piston up every so often. It's as simple as you just press a button and the repeaters just keep the signal going. And then you get your bow and any variety of tipped arrow you want. And they've actually just changed all the colours of these, so they'll all be different now. The combinations you can do will all be unique. And you just fire them straight down like that. It has to be straight down. Press the button, and it has that nice little particle effect. And obviously the more arrows you add, the more particles it'll create. I quite like this technique, and that's the whole concept of adding life. You're trying to add some like animation or movement or something organic or natural to your Minecraft builds. And even still, to me, after making all the builds for this video, adding life is still a tricky concept for me to get my head around sometimes, but this is a very interesting way of doing it. And another application for this particular redstone contraption is you can have them in a line like this. So this is another redstone clock, and it simply just pushes these up in a sequence like this. They're just delayed with repeaters like that. So then imagine having some kind of setup like this, where you've got a pathway. Maybe this is like leading up to your base or something, or your house or whatever. And then you press the button, and as you're walking along, you have like the little fountains of colour, of these coloured particles, flying up in the air. I am a really big fan of this technique, and obviously you got all the different colors of the rainbow, so you can use the different arrows, and you have the whole color spectrum here. You can fit them into whatever color palette that you're working with, and I really like this particular technique. It's something that you can't really accomplish with many other things in this game, these kind of potion particles that I just really like. So yes, movement is one way to add life with redstone contraptions, a very, very good way to add, some extra life to your Minecraft build. Adding on to this idea, you can use redstone components in ways that they're not necessarily intended to be used in. Here we have some flashing lights, and that is simply accomplished by placing two observers facing each other. That's an interesting little technique. It's like, the machine is operating, it's working, the little lights are flashing, maybe they're indicating something. And this particular build here is meant to emulate like a conveyor belt. So you've got this minecart, and it's meant to look like some kind of item moving across a conveyor belt. At the exact point where it gets to where this piston is, the piston presses down, like, something you'd see in like an assembly line or a factory, kind of conveyor belt. And this type of build, maybe you could use in like a more industrial type of base if you're building something like that. I kind of imagine it being near some farms or maybe like a super smelter or something, just to kind of like visually show what's happening in that area. You could definitely expand this concept into like bigger conveyor belts or use different redstone components to achieve similar effects here. So here we have another use for the flashing lights on the observers here. This is meant to replicate like a security scanner. Maybe you could put this in like the doorway of like a shop or something if you're on like a server with an economy. If you are building an airport, this build in particular is pretty good for that. But yeah, I particularly like using these flashing lights because it does make it look like a machine is operating. Like I can imagine having these all over a farm. You could have a kind of setup like this where whenever you flip the lever, the lights start flashing. And that is simply accomplished by a sticky piston with the observers on, which start flashing when they come into contact with the other observers. Here is one of my favourite ones I've built. This is like meant to replicate a faulty fluorescent light. So it's a light that's like flickering, a light that kind of maybe has a faulty wiring or something and like doesn't always turn on. But the cool thing about this is it's not on a timer. Well, it kind of is, but it's random, like what you would see in the real world with a flickering light. The flickering won't always be uniform. And this is accomplished by a neat little redstone system up here, where you've got another one of those redstone clocks literally just repeating. And that's going into this neat little contraption here, which is a dropper that drops an item into this hopper, and then that goes into a comparator. It has two items in here. It has stone and wooden shovels. The shovel gives a higher reading on the comparator, so when the shovel gets output, it turns the lights on. When something else gets output, it doesn't. And the randomness comes from the dropper, because the dropper randomly outputs an item into the hopper, and that means when this redstone line gets triggered from the circuit going round, this light has a random chance of being triggered from the dropper, and it creates this very neat effect where you have this flickering light. Maybe if you're building like an old abandoned building or something, I can imagine like an abandoned city or some kind of like, you know, abandoned office building. Maybe you're in like a post-apocalyptic setting. I can imagine this adding quite an interesting little bit of storytelling and atmosphere to your builds. So moving on a bit now from the redstone contraption side of things, I have a few ideas for some animal habitats that you could add. I think mobs and animals and things are a great way to add life to your Minecraft world. They are naturally very animated and expressive and move around quite a bit. So here I have a couple of little ponds. You know, you can build a little like rock pool like this. It's kind of meant to replicate what you'd see in the real world with like a koi pond if you have one of them in your garden. You know, you can have a few little fish swimming around in there. Just a small addition, but again, it adds that little extra bit of movement and liveliness to your Minecraft base. And here's a bigger version of that. It's kind of inspired by maybe stuff you'd see in Japan. You got this like pergola here with a little like seating area underneath it. Now, of course, any of the aquatic animals can go in here. You know, you can have the axolotl, you could have the different kinds of fish, which the axolotl actually kills, I think. So they're not exactly the best match for each other. Maybe don't put the axolotl and the fish in the same pond. I especially like having the tropical fish because they have like so many different little combinations and color schemes you can have with them. I think there's over like 200 variations of the tropical fish in the game, combining the actual mobs in there with the different like vegetation, plant life and stuff, and even some little unique builds like this, which I'll show off a little bit more later in the video. Yeah, it just adds that nice little finishing touch that is, yeah, just lovely. And of course, for areas like this, the frog is a perfect fit. But if you have stuff like lily pads and these drip leaves, the frogs are actually attracted to them, so they will actually choose to jump onto those blocks more than others, so you can kind of keep them in an area by doing that. And of course, if you really wanted to keep the mobs in an area like this, you could just build like a fence around it. I just love this. I could sit here for ages and just watch the fish and the bees and the frogs and stuff just jump around. Next up, we have like a little apiary for bees. I really like that. It works as an aesthetic little bee farm like you might see in the real world, but it also works as an in-game bee farm because you have the beehives there, and if you place down campfires below there, it works as a perfect little aesthetic looking bee farm. I quite like how this one looks in particular, quite compact and quite nice. The bees flying around, I absolutely love. That is like one of my favorite examples of adding life. Bees are such a good mob. I love them. Not only are they super cute with their massive eyes, but just seeing them like flying around, it just like makes me smile. I think they definitely need to add more mobs like that, like butterflies or something, into the game. Just seeing things like that fly around is just so like relaxing. Mojang, if you're watching, which you totally are, right? Butterflies or other flying mobs would go a long way to adding some extra life to your builds. Here we have a nice little functional horse paddock. It's a simple little build, just kind of a little stable type thing, and you got some simple decorations in here. Literally just got like a little table and a bed here of hay that the horse can eat and sleep on maybe. It's very simple, but also very nice, I think. Having a little place like this to keep your horse is very nice, rather than just kind of like dumping your horse hitched on a post somewhere in your base. Having a dedicated little spot for your horse, it gives them like a little home. Having pets in this game is, again, one way to add more life to your Minecraft builds. This guy, on the other hand, is not a good way to add life to your Minecraft build. And last but not least, for the animal-based builds here, we have a little pigsty. I think if you're gonna have some like animal pens, it really goes a long way to theme them after the animal that is staying there. So in this one, I filled the ground beneath where the pigs are with mud and stuff, and these different kind of soil, the mangrove root root block, some podzol, coarse dirt, packed mud, because they look like mud, and of course in real life pigs love mud. This is quite a neat little build. Personally, I think this is a lot better than having a plain grass field for your animal pens. So if you have something like sheep, you could fill it with like more foliage and grass because they like eating grass. You know, for cows, kind of the same thing. You know, cows like grazing on grass, but of course pigs themselves prefer to roll around in the mud. Just base it off what they would live like in the real world. And of course, there are a lot more builds you can do than these. I just built these few to try and give you some inspiration for what you can do. As I always say, there's probably an infinite amount of builds you can make just based on these concepts here. So that's it for the animal builds, but now I want to go on to some custom plants. A very interesting way you can add a little bit of life to your world. I think building your own custom plants is very interesting, and personally I think it's a lot better than just having the regular Minecraft flowers. Like, sure, they're cool, but having your own custom built plants is a lot more interesting to me. These are just some like simple like alien plant designs. They would go very well in like a nether build, I think, or even in the overworld, depending on what kind of base you have. These plants in particular are very, very interesting. These are really old designs that I've used for quite a while now, and I still like them. I still think they hold up. And you can obviously mix and match the different like blocks you use. You could definitely use different wood sets and, you know, different lighting blocks up there, but that's just what I chose to use. And something I just came up with right now is you could just have that. That is quite an interesting build. Very simple, just sticking a shroom light on top of the twisting vines here. Here we have another variant of that with some like thicker stems, and then it goes into the thinner stem here. We're using a pearlescent frog light with the skulk veins on top for this one. And then for this one here, similar concept, just using the mangrove wood. And we've got the ochre frog light, this time covered in glow lichen. Glow lichen is a very, very good block for like adding a little bit of extra texture to stuff. Finally, here we have one with the unstripped variant of the warped wood, and then we have it going thinner and then going out again into the skulk blocks, which I quite like. Pairing this kind of thing with its own custom landscape is also good too. There are so many different foliage blocks in this game that you can use. Doing a custom landscape like this definitely does add that extra element of life to your worlds as well. And this in particular is one of my favourite techniques. It's using the coral blocks, but in order to use them you have to have some water nearby. So a favourite technique of mine is actually just using a slab that matches the colour scheme of whatever build you have, and then it won't go grey. It'll stay the colour it is if you place it on top of a waterlogged slab. Using the nether wart plant as well is an interesting idea. I don't see many people using that as an actual building block. I normally just see it in farms. Here we have some cute little mushrooms I quite like. These could fit into a nice little fantasy build. So here are a few red variants here, and they even add some lighting because for this one in particular, for the stem, I've used an end rod, so that will actually add lighting when it's dark. And if you noticed in the air here, there are some spores flying around, and that's because you can fit a spore blossom inside this particular build here. If you know me, I love my particle effects. And again, that's another element of like movement and animation which definitely adds a good deal of life. I do especially like these brown ones. They're like miniature versions of the actual generated ones you get in the game. I just really like how I figured out the shaping on these and also the coloration. Like all the colours match. It's just like quite nice. This is using some jungle trapdoors because they fit in quite well and add that little bit of extra shaping to it that I like. As for the actual environment here, it's quite basic. I've just kind of covered the floor in mycelium, but I imagine there are definitely better things you could do with a custom mushroom biome. In fact, going back to the nether warts, they look a little bit like mushrooms. I imagine you could probably use the nether warts in a biome like this. I've come up with quite a few interesting designs for underwater and on water vegetation here. First up here we have some water lily designs. This is using the coral fan blocks, placing them downwards on top of some warped trapdoors. And they don't turn grey here because they're actually on top of a waterlogged trapdoor, so it keeps them from going dry. Very simple 2-block build, but would add a lot of life to your waterways. But as well as that, you can also put item frames underneath them and have a variety of items poking through. So for these, I've made them look like what actual water lilies look like, where you have the kind of yellowish centre there. The same with the purple ones, I really like them. And then the blue ones are a little bit more alien, so I've gone with kind of the warped wood there. We've got some prismarine, the warped block, and also the warped stem, but the unstripped variant. Then for the yellow, I've gone with some green blocks for the inside, mossy cobblestone and just a moss block. We've got a redstone block. We've got the unstripped variant of the crimson stem. It has those like veins going through. Again, that's very like alien. Then we've got some glowstone, which kind of looks like berries or something, and then the nether wart block, which goes very well with the actual texture of the coral itself here, I think. But there's probably so many combinations of these that you could do. Those are just a few examples. We have some other kind of water plants, and these are somewhat based off the real life cattail plants that you might see. So first up here we have some ways you can use the large drip leaf. You can put a flower pot on top of it and have like a plant coming out of there. Then we have some brown candles, which are more reminiscent of the cattails, but still not looking exactly like what it does in real life, not the exact same shape. An interesting design at least. Here we're using the warped fence and brown candles. That is honestly a perfect match, I think. The warped fence is the greenest kind of fence you can get, and then the brown candle looks almost identical to what the head of the cattail plant looks like. We have some with more on them, kind of representing a group of them together. We have one with 4 on there. And then we have some more interesting ones using the flower pot. The flower pot is a kind of similar brown colour, so you can maybe have that as the head of the cattail plant instead of the candle. And then you could put a variety of things inside the actual pot, like the dead bush here, the fern, this mushroom. I do love the mangrove propagule because it makes sense that that would be near water. All very nice plants, I think, and very interesting shapes that maybe you wouldn't have thought of yourself. And lately I've been experimenting a little bit more with making some custom plants in this game. I'm not the best at it yet, but I can feel myself getting a little bit better at it. At least the ones I do in this style are kind of messy looking, but I do quite like them. And I've just gone for 3 variants of these here. It's simply using some green terracotta, green concrete, and lime terracotta to act as a kind of gradient going from the darker at the bottom to the lighter at the top. And then I simply just grabbed a few like organic-y looking blocks. The glazed terracotta is quite good for this. The glowstone I quite liked for the yellow here, and also the raw gold block. Look like kind of flowers or berries or something, especially when you view them from a distance. It has some nice texturing to it. Same goes for these red and blue ones here, just finding the blocks that have like nice little intricate textures to them. And then I've added a few more little details just by adding some like candles on there to look like little flowers, and some banners that maybe look like some petals or leaves or something kind of. And then I've also added in some stained glass that just has a little bit more shaping and a little bit more colour to these builds. Again, I'm not the best at this particular building style, but I'm trying to experiment and get better, and hopefully just showing you these can maybe inspire you in some way to make your own custom plants. And of course, because I love them so much, you can definitely hide some spore blossoms in here. In fact, you don't even need to hide them, because they look like flowers. They definitely fit in with the vibe here. And that adds that lovely little particle effect in the air. One of my favourite blocks in this game, the spore blossom. On the theme of custom plants and stuff, I have a couple of custom trees here. Adding in your own custom trees, so you're not just using the bog standard, again, Minecraft generated trees, goes quite a long way to adding some life to your Minecraft build. So I have 2 examples here, but there are, again, an infinite amount of combinations you can do. Some very like fancy looking builds. These types of like well manicured trees could go very well. And here you have a more like natural type large tree, just using some spruce wood and the oak leaves for the top here. And doing this type of tree in particular, I do use world edit for. I don't just build like this by hand because it's quite impossible to get that natural shaping just using like by just placing blocks down. Using world edit is not cheating by any means. It is a very useful tool and you can get some very nice shapes. If you're interested in that kind of thing, you should definitely look up some world edit tutorials on YouTube. There are so many good ones out there. And for the leaves here, you just kind of have to be a little bit random. What I try to do is just kind of cover up every little bit of wood that I see and then just add a few little bits of variation in there, just like kind of dot around a few leaves until I like the general shape of how it's looking, until it looks full enough and so it doesn't look like there's any like weird like straight edges or anything. And as you see, I'm kind of still tweaking bits, and that's why creative mode is so good, because you can just go in and tweak the shaping a little bit and then go out and have a look to see if you like the shape. And I think those few tweaks I just did helped it a little bit. I'm not addicted to spore blossoms, I swear. You can hide one inside there. You can hide a spore blossom inside the build, and you have those tiny little spores going around, and it adds some nice animation to it. Even this tree here, you can probably hide a spore blossom inside, right? I don't have a problem, you have a problem. Very nice. All the stuff I showed in this video are just examples. There are a lot of different variations you can do, and the idea is to try and get you inspired in some way to build stuff in your own world. Of course, you can copy these builds exactly if you want, but the idea is to give you some inspiration. I think this video has been quite an interesting little exploration into different ways to add life into your builds. It's still something that I'm personally like exploring and experimenting with, but I think the things I've included today do go quite a long way to adding that element of life. And of course, we've explored some different ways you can do that, whether that's, you know, adding some vegetation or some animation, or, you know, having mobs in your Minecraft builds. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I will be back next week with another video on something. I don't know yet. I do have a Patreon page and a Ko-Fi if you want to help support me and, you know, make this a little bit more sustainable while I'm still quite small. And well, yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in whatever the next video is. It's the super secret after the end of the video message to tell you that I have a Discord server. If you want to chat about Minecraft or other stuff, click that link in the description or pinned comment, and you can go there. It's currently empty as I record this because I've just made it. Hope to see you there.